Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia on Comcast Channel 66 and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, and on Facebook at PHM-WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by School District Correspondent Lisa Haver, and our own Vanessa Maria Graber will speak with Bill McKenney of the New Kensington CDC. Denise, how are you tonight?
Helps if I unmute. Good. I'm good, Larry. How are you?
I'm fine. Doing very well. We have a packed show tonight, so we're going to get right to it. So here is our interview with our own correspondent, Lisa Haver. All right, Lisa Haver, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Larry, Denise, it's good to be here.
So we've seen a lot happen over the last couple of weeks with education at the state level and the local level. There's a lot going on. Where are we right now with vouchers? This has been a big topic over the last couple of months, really.
I would say in terms of vouchers, new vouchers, victory, old vouchers, not so much. Mixed results. As I wrote in Hall Monitor about the new voucher proposal called PASS, Pennsylvania Award for Student Success, which is basically one of those things that's characterized as a lifeline for children who are characterizing what the proponents characterize as failing schools, failing public schools, which is a very broad brush and is not correct. There are a lot of very high functioning public schools in Philadelphia. And the proposal for that was $100 to $300 million. It did not pass. However, we did get, the legislature did approve additional funding for the already in place voucher programs, $75 million increase for the educational, it's the EITC, the Educational Opportunity Scholarship, and the OSCC. They're both voucher programs, which were passed in 2001 and have been expanded every year since. So it seems like whoever the governor is, there must be, in order to get your public school funding approved, you have to put a little more in that voucher kitty. So there wasn't a clear victory for the defenders of public education. I think a lot of people are not aware that we already have voucher programs, that the voucher program, as I called it in my article in Hall Monitor, is saving children from failing public schools, the sequel. This is following the big push for over 20 years for charter schools, which are privately managed schools, which are said to be public schools. I do not accept that they are public schools. They're privately managed. There's very, inadequate oversight. But when you look at vouchers and charters, what they have in common is that they're born out of this free market idea that, the marketplace should run education. And the underlying idea that children are accepted at all public schools. If you live in Kensington, you walk down the street to your neighborhood school. If you live in Germantown, if you live in the Northeast, you have a public elementary school and you have a middle school, and you have a lot of choice, actually, which high school you go to. You are accepted at your public school, and it is a neighborhood public school, and is a community project, is a community entity. When you talk about vouchers, really what happens to the students who apply is that most of them are rejected because they are private schools. And you can come with your voucher and say, well, I'd like to go to this parochial school or friend school or, elite school on the main line, but very little chance you were going to get in. I mean, if a private school's tuition is $30,000, $50,000, your $1,500 voucher is not getting you into that school. So the whole idea is based on diverting money from public schools, from communities, and sending it to private schools. As I said, a feature, not a bug, of this voucher system is the lack of information. And in fact, again, kind of echoing what we saw in the PA charter law, which is very little oversight and designed to have a lack of information and a lack of oversight. Ed Voters PA has done a lot of work on vouchers, and as good as they are, they can only give you the information that they have, but the law was written to make sure that there is inadequate data. So when we say, $2 billion over the past 23 years has been sent to private schools, what are we getting for that? How much better are these children being educated? The legislation, Act 46, passed in 2005, sharply limits the data that the state can collect from both the scholarship organizations, which are the organizations that kind of funnel the money to the private schools, and the schools themselves. So when you say, part of the language of the proponents of school privatization is evidence-based, but what we have with vouchers is, even after 20 years, very little evidence to say, hey, this is working. We should do more of this. It's just ideological. Public schools bad, private schools better, even though there's no evidence. And the fact is, in a public school, you must have certified teachers. That's not true for all charter teachers, and it is not true for private schools. It's not. Yeah. I taught a parochial school many years ago. I was not certified, and I didn't even, at that point, didn't even have a degree in education. That was, I don't think the standards have changed. So it's kind of this assumption, I would say, based on racism and classism, that the schools that are private schools and schools that are not in inner city neighborhoods are somehow, automatically better than the neighborhood public schools. But it is a tax credit plan. Businesses can donate to the school of their choice, and they're reimbursed, depending on the location of the school. It could be up to 90 cents on the dollar. Vouchers are a central plank of the Republican platform of Project 2025. The destruction of public neighborhood community schools and the expansion of privately managed schools and vouchers is very much a part of the GOP platform.
Right. And this is a larger discussion that maybe we'll have a little down the road, but one of the things that astounds me is when people talk about, we don't trust government. Okay, fine. All right. So there are reasons that government is not great, but you're going to trust corporations even more, where there is no accountability. You have no accountability. Any of these organizations, at least with government, you can go out and vote. You can get a hold of your elected officials. You can vote on different boards and things like that.
Well, it's kind of funny, because when you say, well, we don't trust the government to run schools, and as a matter of fact, the right wingers and Republicans who talk about public schools always call them government schools, as if that taints them somehow. But I guess they don't see the irony in saying, trust the government to send your money to these schools that you have no control over. So you're actually putting more trust in the government, because in a public school system, you can go to school board meeting. You can go to, the meeting at your school. You can join home at school. You can be part of that. But you may be able to, join a committee at a private school, but you are really trusting the government to send the money, taxpayer money, to these entities where you really have no control over that. So actually I have less control over public dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Now, aren't charter schools, at least my understanding of them, the ones I've been in, aren't they supposed to have like a community board? Because I know that at a couple of the earlier charter schools I covered, parental involvement was mandated because of this perception that, oh, well, they're not letting, the teachers aren't letting me, have a say in my child's education and all of that. Has that changed?
See, that's the thing about charter schools, is that it's not a system. As a matter of fact, the law considers every charter school its own separate, in many ways, its own separate district with a separate administration. Actually, charter schools mostly do not mandate anymore public parental involvement, because that's illegal. That is actually a barrier to enrollment. So say, we've seen charter schools that make parents sign pledges that they will do certain things, that they will be present at certain times. That's a barrier to enrollment for many, working parents, for single parents. That is illegal and a barrier to enrollment. Now, can you encourage parental involvement? Sure. That's wonderful to have family involvement in a school. But every charter school is different. It's hard to monitor that.
And in terms of the vouchers themselves, and this kind of, leads into something that I think that people hear about, but they don't necessarily understand, because I know sometimes I don't understand it. The fair funding formula, was that covered at all in this budget? And what does that mean? Because I've heard it described in several different ways.
Yeah, I thought it would be simple for me to go Google, state budget education funding. It wasn't that simple, because, looked at the Inquirer story. I got a lot of good information from the Children First organization, and again, Ed Voters. And what I can tell you is this: according to Children First, there's $232 million in new education funding. That is not a guarantee, of course, that Philly schools will be fully funded. And by that, I would take that to mean, no deficit, that schools have what they need. They have all the teachers they need. That is fuzzy, because the additional funding has, there's special ed funding, there's some special program funding, but that's $232 million in new funding. However, it hasn't been established yet. And this is the best information. And Children First and Ed Voters always have the best information. It's not clear whether or not that new funding is supposed to be for a 7-year window or 9-year window. Okay. In terms of the voucher funding, as I said, that was passed in 2001, and it's been additional funding every year. And this year's budget includes $75 million increase. So when these were paid with EITC, the Education Opportunity and the out of school scholarship, when they were passed, it started at 30 million. The EITC started at 30 million. In 2022, it was up to 340 million. The OSTC in 22 was up to 125 million. And both of those combined this year got another 75 million.
Wow.
Yeah. and that's just, yeah.
And yet, district funding, how we fund our districts, I know that some of the money is under the fair funding formula and some is not. But yet you have this $340 million plus pile that's going into vouchers.
It's actually diverted from the public funding. So if rich guy in Philly wants to give money to any private school or parochial school, his child's school, rich guy can get, it's actually businesses, it's not an individual. So business can donate money to any school or schools that they want to, and then that money is taken from the public funding, because their rationale is, well, they're giving it directly to the child. The whole Republican, ideology is, the money shouldn't go to the government schools. We don't co-parent with the government. Let the parents, just give the money to the parents, which, obviously puts a tremendous burden on any family, rather than say, okay, I'm going to fight for my neighborhood to have great school because I want my child to go to a great school. Now they have to pick and choose. They have to research the school. They have to say, is this school teaching creationism? Is this school, and I'm not making this up, this is true. Is this a school that says, slavery really wasn't that bad?
Yeah.
Is this a school that discriminates against LGBT students? And we know that parochial schools don't even apply. They do not accept LGBT students, and that includes, the more upscale private suburban parochial schools. Can schools discriminate in terms of disabilities? Yes, they can, and yes, they do. I mean, we saw that, the most extreme example, in a charter school in Philadelphia, Math Science Civics, which just closed its doors, where they, the CEO of that school told one of her students who had been shot and recovering from a completely random, unprovoked shooting, he couldn't come back and graduate or go to the prom. I mean, that's really an extreme example. And in a charter school, which claims to be a public school, but these schools do not claim to be public schools, so they can discriminate. They don't have to let anybody in. They don't have to service English language learners. They don't have to service special, children with certain kinds of special needs.
So, go ahead, Denise.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So let's shift focus a little bit to the year-round schooling discussion, which is not exactly what it sounds like, the way I understand it.
Well, yeah, I know, Larry. It's was kind of interesting. The Mayor Cheryl Parker, the end of June 27th, held a press conference to announce the first year of her promised year-round school program, which was really, the major plank of her education platform when she was running for mayor. But I think the first thing she told everybody was, don't call it year-round school. So it's really, at this point, it's an extension of what's been in place in the district at many schools already for years. The ESY, extended year programs for summer, and after-school programs, and some before-school programs also. The plan for now is that schools would open at 7:30 a.m. and stay till 6 p.m. 20 public district schools and 5 charters were chosen, not by the school community, but by her administration and the administration of the school district. So it's unclear what the priority is. It seems to be the priority was whether they already had these programs in place. I mean, that was actually said by the mayor and her people. Plus, these schools have air conditioning, which is a major point, because so many of district schools do not have air conditioning. So it's really hard to say we're going to have, summer programs if we don't have air conditioning. It's already begun at the June action meeting on that same day, as a matter of fact, the 27th. Board of Ed approved an item for $20 million in contracts and some extended contracts with, Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, other organizations, most of whom already have these programs in place. I think the rollout was really marred by the lack of communication between the park administration, along with the district and the members of the school community. Like teachers in the designated schools got an email, I think just before the press conference, but it was a week past when school closed. So it wasn't as if the principal called people in the faculty meeting saying, let me tell you what's going on, and here's the here's the conditions. And they got this email, was, was fait accompli. Even the president of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers was quoted in the newspaper saying, well, actually, the Parker administration hasn't reached out to us yet. It's not, when you have a new initiative like this, you really want to have the community on board.
Yeah.
You want to say, well, we talked to the parents and the teachers and the students at the school, and, we have a plan. It just seemed like everybody who was supposed to buy into this program found out about afterwards. And that's not a good way to start what I said, was her signature initiative. A lot of issues with this. Again, it's unclear where this is going. Can the district afford it? Where's the funding coming from? We've heard vague statements. It's a public-private partnership. Okay, maybe it will. How much funding do we need? The Inquirer just ran a story a couple days ago that the district is already lagging on recruitment of teachers, principals, and assistant principals. So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, where are we getting the staff to now, go into an extended day and extended year? Obviously, if your school building's open, you need the building engineer there. You need at least one administrator. There's the issue of, coordination between the schools. Families can have one child in elementary, one in middle, one high school. I know I taught middle school. Many of my students had to go pick up their little brothers and sisters. And if they weren't on the same daily schedule, my students would be late. And that was just it, because they had to take their brothers and sisters to school. I think one issue is, and again, the mayor said, don't call it year-round school. Okay, let's call it, enrichment. That's fine. But is it going to be year-round school? And if it's going to be year-round school, is it going to be an enjoyable experience, for kids? Are the kids in Philadelphia going to get to enjoy the summer the way children in suburban districts do? Are they going to have fun? They're going to go to the pool? Are they going to go down the shore? Are they going to have fun with their families? That takes, a lot of coordination, because again, if you have one child in middle school and they're on one schedule, and you have a child in elementary and they're in another, that's a big disruption in families. My question really is like, why was this such a priority? The nature of that primary was there were so many candidates, it was hard to go into detail on any one issue. But I still remain puzzled why this is a priority. I mean, as somebody who's gone to school board meetings for 20-something years, honestly, I've never heard anybody come in and say, we need more. We only have 10 months of this. We need 2 months more of this. I hear people saying we need to bring back school librarians. We need smaller class size. We need more counselors. So I'm still a little puzzled about why this was the priority of the new administration.
Now, when they say year-round schools, do they mean the entire summer is school? Because that's like 2-3 months. So the entire summer would be school, and there wouldn't even be like a 2-week period where the kids could get off and maybe go hit a pool, or maybe go, hang out with family.
Yeah, I mean, Denise, that is really one of the big questions now, because as I said, it was referred to as year-round school by her, up until it seemed like that press conference at the end of June, where the mayor said, don't call it year-round school. She said, this is a pilot year. This is our learning years, is how she phrased it, that we're going to take these programs that are already in place and I guess see how we can expand it. I don't know how a school can stay open every day of the year. I don't. I mean, there's still some, I believe the mayor said everybody would still be off for that winter break. Everybody would still have off for the spring break. But there's still a lot of holes in this plan for now. I just can't imagine a school being open. As I said, if a school's going to be open, you need to have the building engineer or somebody close to a building engineer who can run the physical plant of the school. You have to have at least one administrator, principal or an assistant principal, mandatory. So I don't know, that may be, but I see that as years down the line.
And has anyone addressed the actual physical schools themselves? I mean, when Jalen Hurts, the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, has to give you $200,000 to put air conditioners in your schools, and these are probably schools that are so old that they defy modern wiring. Has anyone addressed this?
Sure. I mean, yeah, Denise, that's what I'm saying is there's a group, Healthy Schools Initiative, Kara Drake out of Penn. Those members of that organization come to the school board. Well, how are you going to make sure that my child's school is non-toxic? What are you going to do about the lead? What are you going to do about the asbestos? There are people who come to say, reopen the pools in the schools. I mean, and they've done a tremendous job, and they've actually started to win. And they've gotten Council Member Jamie Gautier to advocate for. This is what I see just by sitting in school board meetings. This is what people want. I have not, in my memory, ever heard anybody say, I want my school open every day of the year. Why do the Eagles have to fund air conditioning? I mean, they really, I would say they don't. I'd say the school board, as we said, I mean, the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, our members have said for years, yes, we are definitely underfunded, but let's look at the spending priorities of the district right now and say, do we need to be, diverting money to more law firms? Do we need to be paying more consulting firms? Do we need to be paying, without question, the exorbitant salary and compensation packages of the charter CEOs?
Now, would the district be able to determine how much charter CEOs are paid, or is there anything they could do about it?
Yeah, they can read our apps report. We've done reporting on that, Denise, for at least 5 years. And we put out a report, I believe about 6 months ago, updated information. And we have talked about that. If you want to know how much somebody makes at a public school, you just go to one website and you look it up. And everybody from the superintendent down to, teacher, whoever, you can look and see how much that person makes. If you want to know how much somebody who works at a charter school makes, you have to look at the individual 990. And so the members of apps, that is what we did. We went through every 990 of every charter school, and we looked at what the administration of those schools is paid. And if you just take the CEOs, which, as we say, what does a school CEO do? If you have a principal and an assistant principal and a dean, I don't know. But if you don't even look at the CAOs or the CFOs or just if you look at the CEOs of our 87, I believe right now, charter schools, it's over $10 million.
Well, we are obviously in the wrong line of work, Larry.
I've been saying for a while, if we wanted to get rich quick, we should open a charter school.
I have to say there are good people in charter schools. There's good teachers. There are dedicated people. There are parents who believe in charter schools. Their experience in their neighborhood school may have been a negative one. No denying any of that. My problem is it's been a vehicle for too many people to take advantage of for political and financial purposes.
Yeah. So what else should we be keeping an eye on? The school year starts in, 6 weeks, I guess, just about. It's closer than it feels.
Yeah. I think overall the thing to keep an eye on is, we talked about this last time, is what direction is this somewhat new school board going to be taking? We have Mayor Parker reappointed 4 incumbents from that board and brought in 5 new members. And their first meeting was that June meeting. There's no meeting in July. And there will be an August action meeting just a few weeks before the beginning of school. So when you look at, what they're going to do with the money that's coming from the state budget, what they're doing about year-round school, which really, the year-round school itself was discussed very little by the board. So I think there's going to be a lot of issues, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But overall, let's see if this board is going to be any more independent than the boards for the last 6 years.
Okay, and where can people learn more about the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools?
Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools. If you go to a board meeting, we're there. You come over, say hi. We're bringing our issues. We testify. We're on Twitter. We are on Facebook, and we have our website, appsphilly.net.
And that's where you can find all these reports.
All the reports on reports from every board meeting, reports on charter CEO salaries, reports on charter under enrollment, which is more than half of the charter schools. Yeah.
And if people are interested, go ahead, Denise. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Because I was going to say, I just, because you just meant when you mentioned charter schools and under enrollment, and it made me think about the mathematics, civics, and sciences charter school, and the fact that it is officially closed as of the end of the school year. Has anyone found out what is going to happen to those students? Has there been any more discussion?
Not at the school board, and the school closed, and that school really hadn't been functioning well for many, many years, hadn't reached basic standards. But we're talking about people, we're talking about children and their families. And what happened there was just very, very, very wrong. We need to re-examine the state charter law. The board needs to make sure this kind of thing. If you have a charter school that's not functioning, go through the proper channels, which takes years, by the way. If you say a charter is not performing, it takes years. Legal proceedings. This was just one person going, okay, I'm done here. You don't treat people that way. That is very, very wrong. So yeah, there's a lot of questions. The students went to different schools. I mean, that whole school community is broken up. Question is, what's going to happen to that property? I know people are keeping an eye on that. It's not the CEO herself as one person who owns the property, but an organization that she is part of. That entity owns that property on North Broad Street.
Thank you.
All right. Well, anybody who's interested in public education or has concerns should definitely check out the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools. They should send questions to us, which we will then get to you. So if you have questions, let us know. Lisa Haver, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
Larry.
you.
Thank you, Denise.
All right. We'd like to thank Lisa Haver for joining us on the program. She'll be back with us soon to give us updates on everything that's going on with the school district, probably when we get closer to school beginning again to see where we are. Now, we have an interview that Vanessa Maria Graber did with Bill McKinney, who is the executive director of the New Kensington CDC. So here we're going to find out about what's going on in Kensington. So here is Vanessa's interview with Bill McKinney. having some technical difficulties here, but where are we going to be next week?
Well, next week, you and I are going to be participating in a panel as part of the National Association of Black Journalists Convention on how to do your own hall monitor, your own independent news site. We talk a lot about news deserts and underserved communities and stuff, and how there's a need for local news. And we're going to be talking about how you, as a local person, can fill that need. We're going to be joined by Sean Mooring, who is the director of Philadelphia programs for the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. Tracy Powell, a friend of the show from the Pivot Fund, which is a philanthropy that focuses on funding news organizations that are owned by women and minorities in the Midwest and the South. We're going to have one of my mentees, Brandon Robinson. He does Scoop B Radio, which is like his own sports network, and it's really good. And we're also going to have you and me talking about Hall Monitor and what we do and some of the successes we've had and how it's not as easy as we sometimes make it look.
well, that's for sure. It's yeah. I don't even know if we make it look easy sometimes. It's hard doing this, trying to put it together on your own. And there's 4 of us who work to get grants and do all that kind of stuff, and to produce the newsletter, the website, this show every week. It does take a lot, but there's a lot more people trying to do these kinds of things across the country. And we keep getting asked, how did you do it? I'm like, well, we're still doing it. We're still trying to do it. But, it's nice to be asked, and it's nice to be able just to share our experiences and what we've been able to do.
And most importantly, what I like about doing this session, which I'm thinking about doing something similar, for everybody in Philadelphia who might want to know, what's important is you have people who are in small communities where the newspaper shut down or it doesn't print. Like I found out this week that the paper that I used to write for, the Bucks County Courier-Times, no longer prints on Mondays. You can't get a Monday paper. It's Sunday, and then you have to wait until Tuesday until you get another paper. And then you have some places that don't print a paper at all.
Yeah. All right. It looks like we have our interview ready to go. So this is Vanessa's interview with Bill McKinney, the executive director of the New Kensington CDC.
Hello and welcome back to the Philadelphia Hall Monitor. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm here joined today by Dr. Bill McKinney. He's the executive director of the New Kensington Community Development Corporation, and he's also a resident of Kensington. Today we're going to talk a little bit about building community power in Kensington and the possibility of community-driven solutions. Bill, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to talk to you about Kensington this week because, as you know, the Kensington Caucus just met last week at the Block Ministries. There's been a lot of changes happening in the neighborhood, especially in regards to policing and the quote-unquote cleanup that the Parker administration is doing. Can you tell me a little bit about how the neighborhood has been changing since the Parker administration took office, both as a resident and a community leader?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because, like you said, I both work here and I live here, and so changes and things can feel a little bit different from both of those seats. As a resident, I would say I've been here 20 plus years, and so things don't feel necessarily all that different for me, right? There's a lot of cycles that we've been through as a community, and you can just see that, like, historically, every 6-7 years we go through a cycle of people bringing in a series of ideas of what's going to change and sort of fix what's going on in Kensington. And so we're at that moment right now. As someone who works here, and I've worked in a lot of different capacities over the years, but as the executive director of a community development corporation, it's a little different seat, you know. And I've been here coming up on 4 years, and there's a lot of sort of navigation of trying to identify whether it's the executive branch with the mayor or council, where we have a number of newer folks that represent the area, where they're going, and what they're sort of prioritizing. And so that's another piece of the puzzle. When we look at, and those worlds can come together. So I think of just, you know, last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, on the 10th, I think, is when there was the latest sort of initiative to move cars that were abandoned and break up some drug corners. And I'm not totally clear of everything that was supposed to be achieved. But as a resident, I woke up and walked to work, and there was yellow tape blocking every, you know, side street, and there were police everywhere, and people really shoved out on the Ave. And you know, there was the buzz for the 3 blocks I walked to work was everyone going, like, did a police officer get shot or something? Because you never see that heavy of a presence unless that happened. When I got to work, I had to, like, get under the yellow tape and establish that I worked there, to find out sort of what was going on, and then spent the day really supporting residents who couldn't take the bus because the bus wasn't running, who couldn't use Lyft or Uber to get to medical appointments, because we have 51 affordable housing units above our offices. So a lot of those folks need to make it to the doctor and different spaces. And so we spent a lot of time navigating all of that. So that's a sort of all over the place answer, but it's like, again, the worlds are colliding as a resident and as someone who serves the area. And I would say that, like, the sort of common theme is that there's not always a ton of transparency of what's coming, or a lot of collaboration with the community in terms of making things as effective as possible.
Yeah, and a lack of communication, right? If residents didn't know that this was happening and didn't have the ability to register their cars, for example, or move them, then, you know, they're more deeply impacted by these police occupations that are occurring, because it's an occupation in a lot of ways. When you cordon off an area and there's checkpoints, right, and they're monitoring people who are coming in and coming out. If you've been to occupied territories, like that's what it looks like. And so to impose that on residents without, as you say, collaboration or communication can be really jarring to experience when you're trying to walk to work in the morning.
Yeah, you know, I tried to explain to a couple of people, you have to think about, like, the full context of this neighborhood, right? So if this is the neighborhood that, you know, the New York Times just a couple months ago identified as the most violent neighborhood in the country, that we know that just a couple of years ago, this had the highest homicide rate, you know, in the city. At the time, the city had its highest homicide rate ever. I go through those things not to be like reduce the community to just those things, but the reality is this is a community that experiences legitimate and real trauma on a daily basis. And so seeing, like, yellow tape everywhere is jarring and re-traumatizing to the community. And that's part of, you know, something that people need to understand, that some of the things that we do when we're trying to help can actually be re-traumatizing. And I understand, when I'm speaking to folks and they're saying, oh no, we're doing these good things, right? But when we don't do them with community, I always say, like, you end up doing them to the community. And it can be really jarring to folks. It can be re-traumatizing. And at the end of the day, then the things that you were trying to accomplish, you don't have the support for. You don't have people that are going to, again, make something work because it's about their community. And the future is based off of their participation in something. And you end up with people sort of pushing back. And it just becomes this really sort of circular conversation, or a reductionist one, which is, again, sort of re-traumatizing to folks. And it's funny because I don't know if you saw it, but last week, the Wall Street Journal, the editorial board did an op-ed on Kensington on, broken windows, sort of
broken windows, a return to broken windows policing.
Exactly. And they're pointing and basically saying, this is great, like, go do your thing. And it was, funny for me because they said, police came out and did this thing, which is good for the community. Like, they have decided, somebody who is not here, who has never been to Kensington, has decided they're going to write what is good for the community. And then they were like, cue the community complaining, and then used a quote from me from the Inquirer and just sort of saying, look at this guy grousing, complaining about all this stuff. And they don't get the whole story. And they don't also get that, I spoke with, brass from the police district and said, hey, here's our concerns. This is how it could have been better. And they agreed, but they're also, it speaks to some of these larger problems too. They're not built to do the full thing. They're built to do a very narrow thing. And it's a mistake, I think, when we assign that, like, they're going to solve all of these things. They're not built to make sure everyone makes it to the doctor when they're doing that thing. So it's a complicated space, but as usual, the story is told from the outside, and it's sort of defining what works and what doesn't work, and it's unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way.
Well, some might say you're a complainer. Others might call you an advocate because you interact with the community and do quite a bit of community engagement. And that sort of has been your main issue, right? That some of these policies have been imposed without engaging the community properly. How could they do that better?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of steps to it, right? And it all starts from, where your basic belief system is. And my basic belief system is that residents should define and shape their community of choice. And at the end of the day, folks who are in the situation, who have the lived experience with whatever the situation is, has a unique understanding of what is currently happening and what has happened in the past. The deeper that folks are involved in processes also means that there's a deeper investment, and that there is a greater chance, again, not only for like unique and very targeted solutions to things, but for those to be sustainable. So I just start there. Like that is my starting point, is that is a sort of belief in a theory of change that is based off of these concepts. I also think that, again, when we look at this community in particular and the complexities of what we're dealing with and the history of what we're dealing with, that any change here needs to come through participatory frameworks. It needs to come through a trauma-informed approach, and it needs to come through things that are comprehensive in nature. There is no like single solution to anything here. Everything is completely intertwined, and everything is very cause and effect here. And historically, folks have tried to pull things apart and say, we're going to deal with this one thing or this thing over here, and not take anything into account, and that is unsuccessful. So again, I think that is like the starting point is a theory of change, that people need to understand those concepts. I think that people do not understand what participation is, right? So let me that is a key point in this. I think that, we are often sort of we have things placed in front of us that give illusions of participation, and so they end up really being forms of coercion. It is, saying, "Hey, we're going to do a listening tour," right? And the politicians come out and do a listening tour, or we're going to have an advisory committee that actually doesn't have any power, doesn't control resources, doesn't have any oversight, any true oversight on something. And those are things that for a moment folks say, hey, I'm close to power, right? I'm sitting at this table. I'm talking with people. And I always say it too, because folks will say, we have all this change, we have this going on. Have you ever met with whoever? And they'll list the people. And it could be, every sort of branch of government. It could be, I don't know, other nonprofits. It could be whatever. And my answer is yes. I meet with all of the above. I have very few actual conversations with people. I have very few times that people are entering into that room to sit across the table, actually listening and willing to change what they came in thinking. And that's an actual conversation. And so we need to shift, and I'm describing it sort of as an individual, but we need to shift that for a community as a whole, right? We need to move into a space where we're doing the hard work of doing real community engagement, right? Because I also want to be very clear, that is not easy work. It's not easy even for me to have really participatory practices in place within my own organization, right? Because it takes a ton of work, and it takes sort of bringing down your own fear levels, because it's scary. It's scary for everyone to be able to bring themselves wholly to the table.
Yeah, and you have to kind of wear your raincoat to receive all that feedback that you're getting. And
absolutely.
I think that, again, being a journalist who covers local government, sometimes they're not willing to hear that feedback from the public, or, questions around accountability and harm coming from press. And so engagement work, by anybody requires having to, receive those thoughts and opinions and the impact of your work on them. And that's, for me, is, one of the hardest parts, of doing community engagement.
I agree. But it's also interesting, though. I think in some cases we've almost built, rather than engagement, which again is this is a back and forth sort of creation in the moment, that we are actually doing. It's like culture, right? Culture isn't, a lot of time we think of it in a very static way. This is not me as an anthropologist, right? So it's we think of it this static culture versus that we are creating culture in this moment, because we are trying to figure out ways to communicate. And how you speak with your friends after this, and I speak with my friends, it might be a little bit different, right? But because we truly want to communicate with each other, we are doing our best right now. We are trying to figure this out. And that isn't always happening again in the community. This back and forth in a co-creation of forms of communication. What we also see, I think, a lot of times, especially in government, are folks whose role is almost purely to, I'm gonna say, even just take abuse, right? Is to just come into a room and to almost turn off, because everyone's just going to come at them, right? And I'm not sure if that's solving anything, or if it's actually just another form of sort of placating, right? Because I got to yell at that person. I got to yell at my elected official, but then I go home and I'm like, wait a second, we didn't actually build anything together either. And that can be, I think, a confusing moment for folks. So it's very interesting, and it's very complex, I think. And a lot of the time also, I think we're looking and we're saying we have these forms that exist of how people can engage, but they're actually very narrow, right? And they aren't open to anybody. And that a lot of times it's community organizations, or it could be civics groups, it could be friends groups, which are wonderful, and I think they have a very significant role. But at the same time, if somebody doesn't want to participate in that, is there another space? Right? Is there, this goes to me as a resident now. Like if I pulled myself out of my role in my job, do I have the opportunity to participate in the larger discussion as a resident? And that's something that even happens, again, I'll be in a meeting with somebody, and if it gets a little charged, a lot of time what folks will say, and you've been there, here, take my number, you can reach me. Right? And it's a power exchange, right? And then if I'm sort of fooled by that, I go, oh wow, I have access to that now, so I am happier. Like I am better. But at the end of the day, my next door neighbor doesn't have access to that, and I'm not sure if that person who gave me their number is actually going to do anything if I call. The goal was actually to placate me. That's not engagement. So I'm sort of giving examples to answer your question, which is like, here's a bunch of things that we're all familiar with and we all participate in. And we have to say, no, that's not good enough. Or also when we think of sharing power, if I make it to the table, because you sort of introduced me in a way of saying like, your thing is sort of this. And it is, because I have access to a lot of spaces, and my primary role, once I make it in that space, should be opening the door and creating space for others. That's the only reason I exist.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying, that you have to start with a theory of change and actually care about the people, right? And want to make change, right? Like if you're not approaching it with that intention in your heart, then everything that you do might seem rather performative, in a lot of ways. And that building power with people requires, good communication, honest communication, sharing power, obviously, and collaboration. And if we don't start from there, then a lot of these conversations are not very productive.
Right. No, I agree 100%. And I think it's mission, right? And it's like theory of change, and it's also mission. There's times when like folks will look and they'll say, oh, why don't you work with that partner? And I'm going to make it very generic in terms of like, it might be a for-profit, right? And their mission may be like,
all right. We would like to thank Bill McKinney for being with us and Vanessa Maria Graber for submitting that interview. We'd also like to thank Lisa Haber for joining us on the program. Next week, we will be joined by Kimmy Cook from the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia. So we will see you next week on Hall Monitor.